So we are live and people are jumping on. Mikhail, you have just written this extraordinary Substack, which I recommend everyone to read. The headline of which is History Channel Kremlin Edition. And you take us inside the talks that have just finished in Istanbul between Russia and Ukraine. So tell us what happened. I mean, I'd never heard of this man who was leading the talks, the Russian former culture minister and Putin's ghostwriter, Vladimir Medinsky. Is that how you say it?
Absolutely. That's a bit of a ridiculous figure, and it's but I decided to write about it only because we hear quite a lot about those negotiations and that there is a hope for peace. And Russia at last started negotiations with Ukraine, and President Trump called Putin, and Putin said yes to negotiations. And it looks like something is changing. It looks like it's getting better. It looks like that the peace is somewhere, and we see the light in the end of the tunnel. But there are a few important details, and the figure of the person who is the leading Russian negotiator is very important, because this person's only job is to imitate the negotiations. He's not the diplomat. He's not the person who can take any decisions. Uh, he's not influential. He's not the specialist in global security. Uh, he's
So,
just he's just the person who talks, and who talks only about history. And he's not the real historian. He's former um, uh, public relations specialist. And I can tell you the story, a long story, or like paradoxical story, because I know this person very well.
oh, you do?
I know him personally because we happened to graduate from the same university. So I've known him since I was 18, probably. And it's really paradoxical that this person is treated as the head of Russian delegation, but for many people in Russia, he's very well known, and he's known as the as chief historical propagandist. And yes, you mentioned it correctly, that he is some kind of Putin's ghostwriter, because we know that Putin is obsessed with history. And when Putin was interviewed by Tucker Carlson, he was lecturing him about history for 40 minutes.
Yep.
He wrote several he kind of wrote several articles on Russian history during the last years, but obviously he's not writing anything himself. So the person behind the curtains, the person who is entitled to write all those historical works for Putin, is Vladimir Medinsky, uh,
So, and you said something.
former Minister of Culture. Yeah.
So you wrote something which I thought was fascinating. You said Medinsky is also the author of the official state history textbook introduced in Russian schools in 2023. So if you go to school in Russia and you get handed this, who does it say it's by Vladimir Putin?
No. It says it's by Vladimir Medinsky. So
It does.
not all historical texts are written and published under Putin's name. Medinsky is officially in charge. He's like a court historiographer. He's the chief official historian. Even more, in Russia, there is such very, like, now it's meaningless, but it used to be very influential organization in the Soviet Union, the Union of Writers. Back in the day, it was very important that every writer, every journalist had to be the member of the union, otherwise they wouldn't be paid. So by now, Vladimir Medinsky is the head of Russian Union of Writers. So he's chief official author in the Russian Federation. And yes, he authored all the official textbooks of history. And since 2023, it's mandatory. So no school in Russia can teach history using any other history textbook except for textbooks written by Medinsky. I know quite a lot about that because I have some kind of network of history teachers who teach in Russian provinces in Moscow, and I have some kind of secret seminar online for them, and that's why usually on regular basis I'm getting the information how it really works. And they say that yes, unfortunately they have to use all those textbooks because that's the only way for the students to pass the exams. So all the exams in Russian schools are very closely tied to Medinsky's textbooks, but the teachers say that they are so ridiculous and it's such a brutal propaganda that for high school kids, for teenagers in their 16, 17, 18, it's so clear that that's just a lie. That's a very bold Russian aggressive propaganda that it only makes them more curious. So basically, the terrible textbook works well. Um, Kids understand that it's a lie, and they want to read more. They want to hear another version. They want to hear the real story. So yeah, that happens when the propagandists care much more about the money than about he's a very cynical person, and that's clear from his public relations background. He used to be the publicist working for the biggest tobacco companies, so he was that kind of bad PR specialist
Right.
who was selling death.
So
If
he's a spin doctor.
Yes,
Selling, yes,
he was a spin doctor, and if you
yeah,
remember that book by Christopher Buckley and the movie based on it, Thank You for Smoking.
yes,
So that's exactly about that type of person, the person who was selling tobacco advertising, who was creating it, who was helping tobacco companies to sell more cigarettes, and now he realized that it's much more profitable to sell patriotic history, to sell imperialist history, and he switched to that.
Well, I want to come back to that because I want to ask you eventually, about how these high school kids get access to real history. But 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 let's just talk about the history lesson this man Vladimir Medinsky's been giving in Istanbul at the talks, because this is what you say that is so fascinating and flies in the face of what we were told after the Trump Putin phone call, that these your reporting suggests that these were not talks about peace at all, that this man Medinsky used the talks to give everyone there a quote unquote history lesson.
Mm-hmm.
And that the parallels, and he sort of said, look, if you go back and look at certain periods of Russian history, you can see that it's perfectly acceptable to continue fighting, which is obviously what the Russians have been doing in Ukraine, despite saying they were going to have a ceasefire. They haven't ceased fire.
Mm-hmm.
And this man has gone on and compared the current situation, right, to some really shameful moments in Russian history. And you talk about the invasion of Finland, right?
Yeah. Yeah, he uses a lot of different examples. Some of them are very distant examples. His During the negotiations, he quoted and he mentioned the war against Sweden, which happened in early 18th century. So comparing Russia today to early Russian Empire of Peter the Great in his war against Sweden doesn't seem ridiculous to him. And his quote is that Russia was waging war against Sweden for 21 years, and that was okay. So we are ready to continue this war for 21 years again. Um,
Well, let me stop you there, though, Mikhail, because that what you write, I thought was really, really interesting, because he sort of says that Peter tried to uh, offer peace earlier on in the war, and the Swedes were the ones who continued. And you kind of imply, at least the way I read it, that at the end of the war, that the British and the French, I mean, others were not interested particularly in seeing that war end. And so it was a very good thing that the Russians continued to fight, and ended it on their own terms. I mean, this is the story he's giving. And obviously, I was thinking, because again, part of the Putin's messaging, right, around why he's got to continue fighting in Ukraine it's bigger than just Ukraine. It's to do with NATO, right? That everyone around him has expanded the NATO footprint, and it's not just a war with Ukraine. It's bigger.
Yeah, exactly. And that's how this war started. I think we discussed it with you last time, that that's the main narrative of Russian propaganda right now. That the evil, the most dangerous evil is Europe. It used to be America many years ago. It's not like that since this January. But for current Russian propaganda, Europe is the biggest evil, and every day, on a daily basis, Russian propaganda underlines that fact, that actually that's a war against the West, women against Europe. And Britain and France collectively have become the key enemy of current Russian state. So using his historical examples, he always emphasizes that fact, that for ages, for centuries, Russia has been in war with Britain and France, with Western Europe, and no matter whom Russia fought, was it Finland or Sweden or Turkey? In reality, the real enemy behind the curtains has always been Western Europe, and they were financing, they were supporting, they were sponsoring every enemy Russia had, including Finland or Sweden or Turkey or Ukraine. And so that's the leitmotif of all those propagandist narrative.
So do you have any insight into, who else was in these talks? Who was there from Ukraine? What happened at the end of days of this history lesson from Medinsky?
Uh, yeah, it's more or less clear. The head of the Ukrainian delegation was the Minister of Defense, Ruslan Umerov. So, like, Minister of Defense is the real position. That's the man who is in charge of the war. Um, the head of Russian delegation was he's not even a member of Russian government.
No.
Uh, he has no official, but he's Putin's aide. So, but he's not the aide on security or international
No.
affairs. He's aide on history. And the second member, which is probably more important, was the FSB general, whose name is Sergei Beseda, uh, who is the FSB general in charge of Ukraine. He was in charge of Ukraine even before the invasion. Uh, he is he's kind of FSB foreign minister. So he was the real person to have negotiations. But and we see only there is one obvious result of all those talks in Istanbul. They agreed to have a prisoners of war swap, 1,000 Russians for 1,000 Ukrainians, and that's a very positive result. So, but that's even before that, even before those groundbreaking negotiations, these negotiations about the prisoners of war never stopped. They were not as successful as they are now, but we were seeing constant swaps between Russia and Ukraine during the last years. So it was not like negotiations about prisoners of war is not the negotiations about the ceasefire, not negotiations about peace. And yes, it's successful. That's the real result. Obviously, Beseda, the FSB general, was in charge of those talks. It has nothing to do with ceasefire, and no one is trying to pretend that these negotiations are about ceasefire. I will mention it again using numerous historical examples. Medinsky tried to prove that to have negotiations about peace, one doesn't have to have ceasefire. And he used war in Vietnam and war in Korea, as well as Stalin's invasion of Finland in 1940, as the examples of talks and hostilities can happen at the same time. Yeah.
So, against that backdrop, what do you make then of Monday's telephone call between President Trump and Putin? Because it seemed to me that there was a clear winner and loser, to use Trump language, on that call, and Putin came away the winner. It basically said, butt out, and leave this to Russia and Ukraine, and Vladimir Zelensky, I think, rightly sort of threw his hands up in the air. But what's your take on the whole thing?
You know, for me, it looks like deja vu because we witnessed same conversations before that, and I didn't see anything really different. So the only difference from their previous conversations was that this time Donald Trump mentioned Vatican as another possible mediator, and that the new talks could move from Istanbul to Rome, and Pope could be some
Well,
kind.
so what do you think of that?
Mm, I don't think that it changes anything. It doesn't change anything for Russians, because from the beginning, Putin's idea was to make all those talks longer. He doesn't need to have peace. He doesn't need to have ceasefire. He needs to continue negotiations with America about lifting sanctions, about economic cooperation, about um, American companies coming back to Russia. Because what I hear from Russia, Moscow is filled with different American entrepreneurs right now. A lot of people are coming. A lot of people are, so the borders are not closed. You can travel to. There are no direct flights between Moscow and New York City, but you can fly via Istanbul easily, or Dubai, or any other place. And there are several dozens of American businessmen having negotiations in Moscow. Most of them, for my sources I've been talking to, seem to be adventurers or some con artists, because the
Right.
negotiations they look too ambitious to be true. About restoring Nord Stream gas pipeline, about building Trump Tower in Moscow, about American companies buying Russian oil companies, which is impossible. But like it's too ambitious to be the starting point of the negotiations. But like we definitely see that some process has been started, uh, and that's actually something that Vladimir Putin wants. He wants to start direct negotiations with American business, with Trump administration, and he wants to untie that process from Ukraine. So he needs to make sure that everyone knows that he is continuing negotiations with Ukraine. It's going to be long. It's going to be very tense, hard process. It's going to be difficult. No one has to have ceasefire during that process, so there's going to be no ceasefire. But yeah, we are on the right track. We are on the path to peace, but that's an endless path. But meanwhile, we're going to have very constructive economic cooperation.
Well, I mean, so the Trump would argue that his one message, there was a friendly 2-hour phone call reportedly. Neither one of them wanted to end it or be the one to end it. They called each other by their first names. But Trump's message was, we're not going to have economic reparations. We're not going to remove sanctions. Although I don't think the sanctions, you and I've talked about whether or not the sanctions have worked. I don't, not well enough, clearly. And but he has said that there cannot be a normalization of the relationship between the US and Russia until there is a peace. So, I mean, do you take that at face value?
Yes. I don't think
Yeah.
that President Trump is naive. I don't think that he is. He's not pragmatic. I think he's very pragmatic.
Yeah.
And everyone in Kremlin remembers that he can be tough. He during his previous presidential term, he showed very tough approach to Russia in Syria when he authorized the elimination of a huge unit of Wagner fighters.
Yes.
300 people were killed, and that operation was authorized by President Trump and by Pentagon. So, and that was a shock for Kremlin. They still remember it. So they know that he's not just a potential friend. He could be a very serious partner, and they are trying to deal with it. Uh, they don't have. They are not so naive as well. They don't see any kind of goal to lift sanctions forever. They they think that the time is on their side. If
Mm.
we remember that their only strategy, or I would rather say their only tactics, is creating chaos in the West, creating chaos in Europe, creating chaos in American policy. Um, that is the only goal. So, and yes, they are totally fine. They actually don't need uh, any sanctions to be lifted. Russian economy is not dying because the
Mm.
most important sanctions that could we think of are sanctions against Russian oil and gas, mostly oil, and we don't see that because yeah, we still have Russian oil exported to the West via third parties,
Mm.
and it's still like it's going to be too hurtful for American taxpayers to sanction Russian oil. Uh, so no one does that. Putin doesn't want new sanctions against Russia, and that never-ending negotiations, never-ending talks guarantee that there are no new sanctions. But he doesn't have to worry because Russian economy, in a way, all the money of Russian oligarchs are locked inside the country. Before the beginning of the war, most of Russian oligarchs used uh, to take all of their profits and to keep them in Western banks, in offshores.
Right.
Now all Russian money are locked inside the country. The inflation is huge, but a lot of money. Russia has never been that rich. The prices in restaurants in Moscow, the new restaurants, new hotels, uh, a lot of rich people, even in those cities which have always been considered to be depressive. That's not how economic crisis looks like. So I don't think that the ultimate goal of President Putin is to sign kind of groundbreaking cooperation deal with Donald Trump. No, he is fine with that status quo.
He just doesn't. He doesn't want. He doesn't want heavy sanctions, particularly on oil. He doesn't want any new ones.
Yes, and he wants to destroy NATO, and
Right.
he knows what that the current foreign policy, that his current foreign policy and current American foreign policy destroys NATO.
Well, so when I sent out a note to subscribers telling them to tune in, I asked the question: so has Putin won? I mean, is it over? I mean, what cards does Zelensky have at this point?
I think that from what we see, Western Europe has been more unified than it was before. The U-turn in American foreign policy was a very sobering fact for Europeans, and the new German Chancellor uh, seems to be the person who is not seduced by the perspective of becoming German Donald Trump, although he was called German Donald Trump during the electoral campaign. So yeah, I think that Europe is going to continue supporting Ukraine more and more. So yeah, I think that Ukraine is going to be able to continue that resistance.
But it's going to take. This is. I mean, you're talking earlier about the 21 years that Peter the Great, was at war. This. I mean, it's going to take Europe time to be able to, meaningfully support Ukraine. No,
Well,
I mean
I still hope that's delusional and absurd. That you cannot compare any war of 21st century to the
yes,
war of 18th century. So yeah, Russia didn't have like Russians and Swedes. They didn't have artillery. They didn't have anything. It was completely different warfare. So yes, they could continue that. Like we know that the wars in those centuries could last for 100 years. So yeah, it's so ridiculous comparison, and I'm really ashamed that the person from Russia thinks that he can fool anyone with all those um, uh, political games. But definitely, Russia is able to continue this war for a year and for 2 years, for 3 years. It's not gonna be doing better and better. But Russian economy is on the military rails. So in Russia, Russian economy is ready for keep for producing more and more weapons. So for
right.
Russian economy, it's much more dangerous to stop the war, because if the war is stopped, there is a problem what to do with all those military plants, all the military industrial complex, what to do with all those soldiers, what to do with all those um, workers producing weapons. So the threat for Russia is peace, unfortunately. So yeah, Russia is willing to continue. It's going to take thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, and for Ukraine, that's going to be brutal. At the
Yeah.
same time, we see that uh, the more it goes, the more it becomes the war of drones. And Ukraine has made a tremendous success in the drones technology. Ukraine is the leading producer of drones in the world. So it's important to mention that fact that this war is going to be bloody for Ukraine, but Russia is not safe.
Right.
Definitely, the more it goes, the more Russia is going to be targeted by Ukrainian drones. There was like a huge mass before the Victory Day a few weeks ago, when Russia was celebrating the 80th anniversary of the so-called Great Patriotic War, which is the Second World War in Russia. And everyone was expecting the attacks of Ukrainian drones, even in Moscow, even on Kremlin, even during the military parade. So yes, it has become another factor of this war. Um, and yeah,
Well,
so it's when they say that Russia is able to continue this war for 21 years, I don't think that they know what they are saying. After all, in 21 after 21 years, Putin is going to be 94.
yeah. Unless he's
Because
figured
yeah,
out, yeah.
I believe that hypothetically he could be president till he's 94. That can't happen.
Right, right.
He's
So
healthy.
coming back to what you said at the beginning about the kids in the high school being, forced to read these, and the books are so clearly absurd. The history that they read is so absurd. Where can they find other versions? Where do they get access?
It's very important to start with the explanation how the new textbooks are different from the previous version, because Russian history, there is a very famous perestroika era proverb that Russia is the country with unexpected history. Uh, History changes all the time, and
Right.
since perestroika, since the 80s, there was the accepted version of Russian history, which was very critical to Stalin and to Stalin's period. Great Terror of the 30s was clearly seen as the worst nightmare in Russia's history. That was the genocide, Stalin's communist genocide against his own people. So it was, uh, in a way, it was the version of Holocaust, but organized by the ruler of the country against his own population. And that was the only way to talk about Russian history during the post-Soviet years. And that is the tradition that was stopped by Medinsky. In the new version of his history textbooks, he glorifies all previous Russian rulers. It's absurdly uh, very, it's not only imperialistic, it's very much focused on the rulers. And all of them are the best. All of them were real great leaders, and they were making Russia great, including Ivan the Terrible, who was, according to Medinsky, not terrible, but a very kind and wise ruler. With Stalin, it's the most recent history, and that's why it's the most hurtful for a lot of people. So basically, Medinsky's textbook justifies all Stalin's great terror. It's written there that it was wise decision to get rid of the fifth column. It was not wise decision to exterminate all the traitors or potential traitors, because Soviet Union had to prepare for the Second World War, and if when Soviet Union was attacked by Nazi Germany, there was that fifth column, Soviet Union might have lost. But fortunately, Stalin was wise enough to kill millions of people, and he prepared his country for the Second World War. So that's the major change in the new version of Russian history. Plus, there are a lot of much more ridiculous lies, not so scary, not so infernal. Uh, but if you are asking me for another sources, uh, that change happened only yesterday, like 2023.
Yeah.
It happened just 2 years ago. Uh, the process of burning books has not started in Russia yet. We are like Russia is standing on verge of that process, and it's very symbolic that last week the so-called publishers trial started, and there were police raids in the offices of several publishers in Russia. They have started criminal cases against different publishers. For now, uh, all the affected publishing houses are accused of LGBTQ propaganda. That's the most important criminal offense in.
Every single one. Every publishing house.
No. The raids were in one
Right.
in one biggest private publishing house, and several people were arrested. Several employees of the publishing house
Wow.
were arrested. They are now under arrest, and they are charged with LGBTQ propaganda because they published some books mentioning uh, same-sex love. So that's the beginning of the purge against publishers. So books are going to be threat in Russia soon, rather soon. Um, but it's for now. It's related only to LGBTQ, but it affected every writer because, as you know, I used to be a Russian writer,
Yeah.
and I published even five books in Russia, and four of them were bestsellers. I used to be very popular Russian writer, and clearly, for now, all of my books are, they are not banned. Only the last one is banned. The one that was written after the beginning of invasion, after I immigrated from Russia. But all my previous books are not officially banned. But here comes self-censorship. The publisher All publishers know that it's really dangerous to distribute books of the foreign agents. It's really dangerous to distribute books which contradict official propagandist narrative. Um, I'm in the worst position because I have collection of all the sentences and accusations from the Russian government. I'm foreign agent. I'm sentenced in absentia. It's clear that no one dares to publish or to sell my books. But there are a lot of there was very long tradition, a lot of very genuinely high quality books on history were written and were published during the last years. All Russian bookstores were filled with very high quality books, including books written by American authors. I recently saw the picture which was made by a friend of mine in Moscow in a bookstore, and it was very ironic. It was the shelf with bestsellers, and there were two books standing next to one another. One of them was All Works of Stalin, and right next to it was Gulag by Anne Applebaum. So yes, Gulag by Anne Applebaum is still on sale in Russia. She is not foreign agent, and that's
No.
good for her. And Stephen Kotkin's biography of Stalin is still on sale. A lot of very high quality books written by Russian authors are still on sale. So yeah, you can go to any bookstore in Russia and you can buy it. And not to mention internet. Internet is not that much restricted. They have started blocking YouTube last year. It doesn't mean that everyone who wants to get some YouTube was important for Russia. YouTube was everything. YouTube was the only platform it was the substitute of the television. A lot of very high quality educational content, political content, investigative content is on Russian YouTube, and it's still possible for people in Russia who live there to get access. Uh, and definitely, you can find any kind of literature, including my books, which are banned or almost banned, but you can read everything online. Um,
Right.
so that's not a problem for those who are looking for the truth.
Well, so, and on that note, I wanted to ask you about someone you know whose name came up, Tina Brown, great friend of mine. I think you know her, held a summit in London recently, called Truth Tellers. And I ran into her last week, and she was telling me how utterly impressive Yulia Navalny is. And so I wanted to ask you, um, how much of a following does she have now inside Russia? Do you have any sense of that?
Um, you know, it's really hard to tell, and I need to make a disclaimer. I'm not going to speak as as unbiased journalist. I'm going to be very biased because I like Yulia Navalny a lot, and um, she's a friend, and I think that she's got a great political potential, and I'm always very supportive in everything she does. Uh, she's only in the beginning of her, I hope, very successful journey as a politician. She has started her political career. She had, unfortunately, to start her political career only last year when her husband was assassinated in Russian prison. But she has done some progress. The She has become somehow the unifying figure
Mm.
in Russian opposition. For a few years, there was a talk that Russian opposition in exile cannot be united. They always have fights and struggle against each other. Uh, some people, yes, because some people don't want to have constructive fight against Putin, and they cannot choose their battles. But some people can, and we see that Yulia, together with Vladimir Karamurza and Ilya Yashin, two very important leaders of Russian opposition who were political prisoners in Russia and who were exchanged last year, and now both of them, Vladimir Karamurza and Ilya Yashin, are free. One of them in America, another in Germany, and they usually act as a team. They are organizing political rallies. They are organizing campaigns. It's really hard to tell. What's more important, I participated in Yulia Navalny's forum in Vilnius, which was probably the best collective work uh, dedicated to the future of Russia, because Yulia created some kind of think tank um, that creates post-Putin reforms for Russia, and that writes the outline, the plan for what needs to be done when it's over. And I think it's better to start that discussion now, uh, rather than to find that we don't have a plan when accidentally it can happen any moment, or it can happen in 20 years. um, but I think anyway we should be prepared, and that work, that very meaningful and substantial work, is organized by Yulia Navalny. Uh,
Fascinating.
I cannot I cannot make any estimate about her support in Russia. We don't have any statistics. I know that a lot of Russians are very apathetic and they cannot express their uh, political views, and they prefer not to express. But we saw so many Russians during for example, the funeral of Alexei Navalny, we saw those long lines of people who wanted to pay tribute and to come to his grave and to lay flowers there. And these were the bravest people I've seen, because, like, that in Moscow, you can, in Russia, in any Russian city, you can be arrested for just laying flowers on this man's grave, and still the line was really great. I can tell you that last week I was in Berlin, and there is an art exhibition created by Russia's biggest independent media, which is called Medusa, and that is a great contemporary art exhibition about the political situation in Russia. They asked different contemporary artists to create 10 um, artifacts, 10 pieces of art uh, that that symbolizes 10 most important words uh, throughout the last 10 years of Russian political history. And the last room of that exhibition is called Hope, because that's the 10th most popular word used by Russian independent media now. And it was very symbolic that the only piece of art in that room that was called Hope was a huge picture that depicted the line of people at the funeral of Alexei Navalny. And the name of the picture was Funeral of Hope. And at the
Wow.
same time, the meaning of that was that, yes, this is the funeral of hope, but this line is hope itself.
What a fitting way to wrap up for today. Wow. Well, Mikhail, I know that you and I will be talking in the near future for the
Thank you
next
so much.
chapter in this saga. But thank you
Yeah.
very, very, very much for
Thank
joining
you.
today.
Always a pleasure
Thank
for
you.
me.
Bye.
Bye bye.